Good morning, and hopefully you can understand my Australian accent on the way through. It gives me absolutely great pleasure to introduce you to this session, and most importantly to Deb and the GFK team, who we have worked very closely with for many years in the development of what is now Radio 360 measurement, which we're launching. Deb's worked with GFK for about 10 years and was awarded the Australian contract by Commercial Radio Australia at that point in time, some 13 years ago. She's going to share with you today the Radio 360 hybrid measurement system, which we see as very much a world first, and I'm sure many of you here today are very interested in where we're going. By way of background, I am Grant Blackley. I'm the Chief Executive of Southern Cross Austereo. We have 100 radio stations, 600 podcasts, and the leading audio app in Australia called Listener. I'm also a director of CRA and formerly the chairman of CRA for the last 5 years. Thankfully, I've passed that on to someone else most recently. In that particular time, we saw the benefits of migrating from what was a very traditional measurement system into a hybrid model moving forward with the inclusion of both streaming and hybrid data. And in looking at that, we knew that we needed to compete with many more industries, and we've just heard very much in the main auditorium that we have to grow, look at new opportunities. We have to measure differently to remain in front, and this is certainly the case at this point in time. We're at a stage where we have developed this with GFK over the last 2 to 3 years. We're now at a point of inception. We have seen some early data. I'm not sure what Deb's going to share with you today. But fundamentally, we've been analysing that data in private. We've just released Survey 1 in Australia, and soon we'll be releasing the data more widely to the marketplace. I think in a data-driven marketplace where we can compete with big tech and TV and out-of-home, who are also developing their measurement systems, I think it's absolutely essential that we mine this data and invest in this in a very qualified way. I must say GFK has been very collaborative and passionate, and their expertise has been second to none on the way through. The system very much was called very lovingly MIP, which is known as Measurement Innovation Program. Just by way of background, we did a super pilot on this last year to understand what the data would look like. And what I will say in the last words is that this is more of an evolution, not a revolution. We're here to enhance and develop and ensure that what we do is in the interest of all in the industry, from both the public and private sector. And I know that we're in very safe hands with respect to GFK. So on that note, I'd like to introduce you to Deb. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm a little bit shorter. There we go, that's better. Hi, so yes, and hopefully you can follow along with my Australian accent. I'll promise to try and talk as slowly as possible. We are known for talking a little bit quick. So my name is Deb Hishon. I'm the Media Measurement Director for GFK Down Under, so I look after Australia and New Zealand. And as Grant touched on, we've been working very closely with the Australian radio industry in modernising our methodology. So moving from that traditional survey-based system to one that shows evolution and enhancement using different data to educate our currency. Many singular studies have been done over the years, and I'm sure many of you in the room have been part of those studies that have shown positives and negatives across all different types of audience measurement tools when used in isolation. And our super pilot that Grant mentioned did show us that a couple of years ago. And our goal was set by the industry to modernise our methodology, take the best of different audience tools and come up with a system that provides additional credibility while maintaining our core audience metrics. The changes that I'm going to share with you today are truly groundbreaking for us in Australia. It's been over 50 years since there's been significant change. We introduced the electronic diary survey system about 10 years ago, and we've now further enhanced that as we move forward with Radio 360. Okay, so why Radio 360? Why the need to evolve our measurement currency in our market? So commercial radio has shown its strength and resilience over the last 10 years in Australia. I've recently conducted share of audio study in Australia looking at the commercial audio landscape, showed that commercial radio still dominated at 75% share of all commercial audio space. A very strong performance considering the growth of the likes of Spotify in our market, which its growth has come from its paid subscription service, so an area where advertisers can't place a lot of ad content. Reach has continued to grow in our market for commercial radio and has done the proportion of listeners that are using a streaming device to actually listen to live Australian radio. And this was really the catalyst for us to look at increasing or delving into the data straight from the radio station's assets, bringing in the additional credibility and robustness of this data into our system to provide additional insight for our users. So what will Radio 360 look like? And as Grant hinted, we actually are live in the Australian market. It is an internal survey at this point. We are releasing our external data at a total audience number right now. But it's going to be made up of 3 core areas. First of all is our digitised currency. We interview over 60,000 respondents a year, and in the last 12 months we've been very quietly working away in the background and moving our 60,000 sample from a predominantly face-to-face paper diary system to a 80% online diary system. So really digitising our currency to make sure that we are lockdown proof and bringing it into a more modern era, because our e-diary can be filled on mobile phone, a smart tablet and PC and synchronises in real time. One of the big things that we've been doing over the last 12 to 18 months is collecting streaming data straight from source. And we're doing this in 2 ways. First is using the GFK Sensic tag, which is an SDK tag that all of our radio stations are placing on all of their web player assets, aggregator apps and web player-based systems. So there's over 3,000 across the country. We're also collecting server logs directly from radio stations from various sources or suppliers, and those server logs are giving us the total volume. Sensic gives us great cross-station behaviour information, device-level information, and some single sign-on information as well, and we're cross-matching that behaviour with what we see with the server log to give us total volume. These 2 data sets are coming together to create the census data, and we then are going to profile it, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we are profiling it, and we're going to integrate it into our currency. We're also doing a Australian first and setting up a wearable meter panel using the GFK Media Watch. Now, this panel will be of 2,000 respondents across our 5 capital cities. It'll be used to do streaming calibration and deduplication in the first instance. And one of the big insights that this asset will bring to our market is the ability to look into new audience insights, things that we've not been able to see before in Australia, a moment in time or a period of time where we're not in survey. And again, I'll talk about that in a few slides. So now we are launched and in market. I can probably talk to you a little bit more about the data science behind Radio 360. And I'm not a data scientist by any means, but I will, and it's a steep learning curve for us all, but hopefully I'll take you through in a simplified way the core 3 areas that we're using. Standardisation, which is ingesting and cleaning all of the census data, then profiling it, how we are putting listeners to devices, and then that final currency integration step, and then how we're delivering it to our users to bring the GFK Radio 360 design together. So standardisation, you can imagine, I'm sure you've all used big data in the past. We are ingesting and cleaning over 1,500 logs weekly from different radio stations and from different server log suppliers. We are then running our own extensive quality control checks through that. We are removing excessive listening like we do for our diary service. We are using geo-mapping to make sure we've got the right listeners in the right spaces. We're removing international and out-of-market listening. And if anyone is familiar, we have the 5 capital cities that we run Radio 360 on, and we have 4 different time zones. So we have to make sure that all of our time zones align so that the information is meaningful. So this creates our census data, and as I said, the Sensic data then we're validating patterns, making sure we're seeing similar numbers coming through on the volume, looking at cross-station listening behaviour through the Sensic tag, because the server logs are stations individually, and then device behaviour, all really important things when we come to our modelling. Our second step is then putting the listeners to device. So you all know that census data is device level data. We need to put listeners on there so we can put it into our radio ratings. For those statisticians in the room, I can tell you that we're using the Bayesian probability model, which is taking multiple education sources to then apply age and gender to our streaming audience. We are using our radio rating system itself. We're also using the watch panel, and I'll share that on the next slide on how we're doing that, and also the single sign-on information that we collect from Sensic. One of the key things that came out of this process was the need for us to develop a co-listening algorithm. We know that people don't listen to radio in isolation, that there are multiple people consuming a stream at a single time, and that is actually impacted by lots of different factors. We ran an initial study of around 1,000 respondents across the country. We came up with our preliminary co-listening, but we realised very quickly that we needed to do something more sophisticated. So we ran another 3,000 respondent survey across the country and found that co-listening actually is affected by a lot of different factors. Not only is it location, so out of the home, in the at work, elsewhere, etc., and age, but the genre of the radio station. A talk news station versus a music station has a different co-listening factor. The day of week, the time of day, are they more likely to be using headphones? Are they from a single person or multi-person household? So many different variables came into that. We came up with a range of factors from a 1 to a 3.4, and it settles at around an average of 1.7 in terms of our co-listening variable. So where does the wearable meter come into it? And this was a question that I've been asked many times over the last couple of months as we're bringing the wearable to market. So we are very lucky in Australia, I know it's different in other markets, that we have a transmission lag. We use sound matching with our wearable meter. So we know that the AM/FM broadcast goes to air. There's a delay of a few seconds before the DAB plus signal goes, and then another delay before the streaming signal. So we don't use encoding, we don't use watermarking, it's pure sound matching. And because of this transmission lag, we can now see what proportion of each platform the respondents that are wearing the wearable meter are consuming. This is a station in Sydney. You can see from underneath the little radio icon, they're the sound matches that are occurring with the AM/FM broadcast. Then there's a lull in matching. We see another spike with the digital audience or the digital radio matching, a lull, and then the streaming. So around 15% of the volume from this radio station is coming from the streams for this particular panel. And when we compare that to the currency or the radio ratings, you can see it's really close and very similar. And then we model the Radio 360 data, and you can see where we sit with 87% to linear, which is AM, FM and digital, and the 13% to streaming. So that's how our wearable meter is calibrating our information and giving us additional demographic points. Then lastly, we come to the currency integration process. So this is where we insert that profiled census level data in quarter hours into our currency. We align the behavioural data around the shape of day, and we integrate that and create average week results. So for the first time in Australia, we're able to provide our industry with linear versus streaming audiences within our currency data set. To give you an example of how that looks, this is real data. This is modelled Radio 360. You can see the dark orange is the proportion of listeners for each of those networks that are streaming. We can then break that down even further and look by network the demographic profile of that streaming audience. So I've de-identified the stations because it is only an internal release at this stage, but you can start to see how the different networks are behaving within their streaming audience. You can imagine there's been a lot of buzz in the media around the new changes around our measurement system. It's the biggest change in over 50 years, as I said. We announced in February that it was going to be a soft launch to the internal users. And we did this so the stations could become familiar with what the data look like and what they're going to do with the data from a commercial perspective. So as Grant mentioned, Survey 1 has left the building. We're busy working on Survey 2, and while this happens, we're also doing an extensive review of the numbers with the industry, and we're rolling out a massive marketing and education program to not only the media, but also to our member stations, so they're aware of what Radio 360 can bring for them, with a launch hopefully mid-year to market. So when we do launch, what will our advertising agencies and our advertisers and all of our radio station members be able to see? And Radio 360 was not only about evolving the measurement currency, but also evolving the way that we understand what our audiences look like. We know that a linear audience and a streaming audience, they're different. They have different characteristics. They're more likely to be younger. Our streamers are more likely to be younger. They're more likely to have a personal loan, been to the cinema in the last month. There's a whole myriad of different characteristics that our linear audience versus our streaming audience demonstrates. We know that their listening patterns are different, and here is the key for us. We know their shape of day, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the orange line. That's the traditional linear shape of day with the peak and breakfast and drive. But when we start to look at the census level data, the purple line at the top there, we can see that it peaks later and lasts longer. So our streaming audiences are behaving differently. And we also know that they're listening in different places. So they're more likely to be listening at work and out and about, not in cars so much for streaming at this stage. We're hoping that this level of information is going to start the media planner buyers in our market to start thinking a little bit more about choosing commercial or live commercial radio instead of the digital audio space that they're using now, and grow that revenue share for our industry, for the radio industry. We have now tools in the marketplace so our users can interrogate the data right down to quarter hour level, comparing linear and streaming. And we also have developed a reach and frequency module so we can plan a linear campaign, we can plan a streaming campaign and see what the overall results will be in an unduplicated way. This is only one station across our country, across our 5 capital cities, and on linear I'm concentrating my spots or my advertising on breakfast and drive. So you can see I'm reaching 27.3% of the population with that one station. I'm tweaking, for the want of a better word, a streaming campaign, and I know that they're listening differently. So I'm placing my spots on work day and weekend to grow my audience reach. And I'm reaching another 4.8% of the population. When I combine that at a total level, we are reaching 4.7% more gross impacts, 3.4% increase in reach, and a 1.6% increase in frequency. Now, I know that seems maybe a little small at this stage, but as our users become more familiar with what the streaming audiences are doing versus the linear audiences, they're going to be able to become more clever and do more intelligent campaign buys and provide more insight to their advertisers in terms of how they can better reach audiences in a more effective way. One of the other big advantages of Radio 360 for us is our ability to look at a commercial, competitive landscape. So the radio stations have been very clever and innovative over time. They have already been using their digital data in the marketplace, but they've never been able to see what their competitors are doing. And Radio 360 gives them that in an audited, independent way. Now, I touched on event audience measurement, and this is one of the big highlights for us in Australia, taking the wearable data beyond its contribution to the streaming calibration that I mentioned before. We've never been able to look at a particular point in time or a range of dates. We're a sporting mad nation, so we like to know how the cricket performs. We had an election, a state election only last weekend, and so it's interesting and insightful for our advertisers and for our member stations to understand what happens to audiences through that. If we want to have a look at a single moment in time, here's an example of what we can do now. And some of you who have metered markets already are used to this level of information, but this is very new for us. The passing of the Queen last year. The blue squiggly line is when she passed away, when the news broke in Australia. You can see that rush to radio to be informed to find out what has happened. The red squiggly line is the Friday before and the Friday after, so you can see what a normal Friday result looks like. And this insight we've never been able to show our users before. And looking at a period of time, so this is really pivotal and brand new information. Thank you. And the survey in Australia runs for 41 weeks of the year. We don't survey over our summer period in December and January. It's because you'll never find any of us doing our normal routine. It's hot, it's Christmas, we're mostly all on holidays. And you can see the first green block is the survey in 2022. You can see the regular pattern of behaviour and volume. We then have the non-traditional survey period, which is December, January. All of our announcers and presenters go on leave. They pack their bags and they're gone for 2 months, and then you can see when they come back that listening spikes again, and then we see a change in behaviour when school returns. But the key thing here for our commercial industry is that the average volume of listening in that 2022 survey period is around 2 hours a day. In the 2023 survey period, it's around 2 hours a day. And for that non-traditional survey period, it's 1 hour and 57 minutes on average a day. So we can show our advertisers that the volume of listening is consistent, even though we're not in survey. Our patterns of behaviour are different, so we don't need to take a revenue hit. We can continue to charge similar levels, and hopefully it'll be an ultimate upside for the commercial industry. So I hope that's given you a very good insight into what Radio 360 will bring to our market. It's only the first piece of the puzzle, as Grant alluded to. We are already working very closely with the industry in bringing podcast behaviour information into our day-to-day data. And then the next big step for us, and actually around the podcast information, I'm hoping I'll be able to share a lot more information in the next couple of months around how we're integrating that. Will be the addressable audience level and building that bridge between the currency data and the addressable audience data, and enabling our users to do cross campaigns across both. So as I say, please stay tuned. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I think we're going to take questions at the end of Daryl's session. So.
Good morning, everyone. So mine's a New York accent. Hopefully you can find it, figure it out as well, and I'll try to talk slowly also. I'm here to talk about hybrid audience measurement from the big data perspective, the server log data that is an input into a hybrid measurement approach. Thank you, Radiodays Europe organizers, Peter. Thanks, attendees. I tried talking about this topic with my family. They were like, "What are you talking about?" In the Czech Republic, in Prague, and they had no interest in this topic, and I think you guys are amongst the few people in the world who might have interest in this topic, I hope. But honestly, I think that you should. I think that it will be a big advancement for the radio industry. And I think that what Deb presented, and not surprising that the Australians are pioneers at this, but I think it will become widespread over the course of this decade, much more common, and you'll see it rolled out in many places around the world. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of the data that goes into a hybrid approach. So I tried to find some hybrid examples and analogies in the world. The liger being my example for an animal. I'm not condoning interbreeding of lions and tigers, but it's an interesting combination. Definitely a majestic animal. One interesting thing is that they are larger than either of their parent species when breeded together. They take on certain characteristics of both, but you do have to be very careful when breeding, and they are ferocious. And the same care needs to be put into combining sample-based measurement with big data from logs. So one thing that's clear is that measurement of audio has gotten harder, and it has put pressure on samples and panels to have a larger sample size, more expectations from the respondents who participate in those samples and panels, and ultimately that drives costs higher. And it started as we just had to measure traditional over-the-air radio. And then digital frequencies were added, and that resulted in additional stations, often smaller in audience, that are harder to measure. And then online listening came, starting with computer, and then mobile, smart speakers, and then wireless headphones and earbuds, which for any metered approach that listens to a code in the audio, that creates a particular challenge. And then lastly, we have increased competition from digital media, social media, who are selling off of advanced audience segments like the shopping behaviors and the interests of the audience. And we need to compete against that as a radio industry. Just a little bit, just to align on a definition of hybrid measurement. It is the combination of a sample-based measurement approach and big data or census data. And the sample data is typically persons-based measurement of individual people and what they do that cooperate in a panel or a diary or a survey. And it's a relatively small group of people that are representative of the population that are used to project out to the universe of the population. The census data is a large digitized data set, and it covers most, or in our case, all of a specific action. But it lacks in certain information. It's not at the individual person level. It's IP address, or in some cases, census data could be a device, it could be a household. So I want to provide a little bit of an overview of the streaming audio big data, the server data. It covers every individual listening session. So every time a listener clicks play to a stream, it is triggering a log and providing record of that listening. And that covers all devices. It covers computer, mobile, smart speaker, smart TVs, any listening device to listen to a stream. Covers all players and apps, so whether it is the broadcaster or publisher's own app or website or third-party app that they make their content available through. It collects all of the listening across any player. And it covers all geographies, so it covers both within the radio station's local market as well as outside that market, and even outside of the country, you can listen to the stream of a radio station. It does include real-time preliminary data. So right away, you can see who's listening, not who, but you can see how much listening there is to a stream and track that as it is occurring. And there are metrics that exist like total listening time, the number of individual listening sessions, and the average time spent listening are examples of the metrics that are available from the big data from the streaming logs. The way it works from a Triton perspective, we have companies who stream their broadcast online using Triton technology. In addition to that, we also provide full ad tech stack to monetize the audiences as well as measurement. But from a measurement perspective, the companies that stream using our technology, again, a log is produced for every listening session, so we have that. We have the ability to put a code in the publisher's player to listen to the audio there, and we also have the ability to collect logs from third-party streaming providers and process and measure that the same way. And so what that is enabling us to do is provide a consistent and fair measurement approach that the whole industry can use. And that data can be reported through the Triton user interface, through third-party reporting systems, or may be made available for measurement integrations. And we're here to help support that effort to advance the measurement. One thing that does need to occur, this data is not automatically clean and neat and ready for an integration. It is messy. One thing is the primary identifiers are IP address and user agent. So the IP address, you can append the geography of the listening. The user agent will tell you the device and the player or app that was used to listen, and you can append that information. It does include non-human traffic that looks like listening data, but actually is not an actual human. So there are bots and spiders, but there's also like things like monitoring services that are monitoring every stream to look at what songs and ads are being played on every stream. So all of that needs to be removed. We do see different publisher audio players and different content delivery networks are producing messy data. So an example of that is a bunch of individual pieces of data that need to be pieced together to create a listening session, what we call sessionization as part of our process. And we're leveraging machine learning to discover anomalies in the data. We have a data science team that is then researching them, classifying them, naming them, putting rules into place to correct for anomalies in the data, and ultimately writing code to put that into our process. And like I said, we really want a consistent approach that is equitable for the whole industry. My hybrid sports example, I love this sport now. It's called chess boxing, and it's a mix of 4-minute round of chess, followed by a 3-minute round of boxing, and that continues to alternate until you can win or lose either by checkmate or by knockout. So I think that's really cool, but it's also like a mix of like brawn and brains, and I use that example for hybrid measurements. So I consider the big data from streaming to be like the brawns, and then the panel or the sample to be the brains to understand individual listening behaviors. And the good news is that those two data sets complement each other really well. One's strengths help to shore up the other's weaknesses. So one way of looking at that is that the streaming logs can provide an accurate number for the amount of streaming listening, and you can break that down for any tiny increment of time, for any small station. But if you want the intelligence on individual people, if you want to understand the demographics of the audience, if you want to understand reach and frequency, how many unique human listeners there are, then you need the panel or sample in order to help provide that intelligence. But as far as hybrid measurement solutions go, there isn't just one way to do it or one objective. You can have the Ferrari version of a hybrid. There is a Ferrari hybrid now. Or you can have a hybrid solution designed for a specific objective and utility. So I'm going to highlight a couple. The first one is very obvious, which is use the big data from the streaming logs to improve the measurement of the streaming audience. And as I said earlier, you can use the big data to have an accurate count of the amount of streaming listening. You can use the sample for demographics and for, at a broad level, how many unique listeners there are. But if you really want to create a dynamic data set, you want to understand how much unique listeners there are and what the overlap in audiences are across any combinations of time periods, any combinations of stations to help with media planning, to help advertisers maximize their reach. And we believe the big data and the identifiers in the big data, while it isn't persons-based, it does provide you intelligence to help model any combination possible to help produce that dynamic data set and to help get at reach and frequency at any level that you want with proper data science. The second objective, a little bit longer term, a little bit more ambitious, is the idea that can the streaming data help to estimate and improve the measurement of the over-the-air audience? And as I mentioned earlier, there's pressure on the samples and panels to do more and more. And perhaps that pressure can be relieved and reduced and have panels and samples just be focused on measuring very broad periods of time in aggregate. And then using data science and the big data to help fill in the gaps and do more. And what we believe, we've taken a little bit of a look at this, but we'd like to partner to do more, is we believe that the streaming audience can help predict the over-the-air radio audience. So granted, those audiences are different people, but when a morning show, when the over-the-air audience increases, the streaming audience increases as well. If there's a big guest or something that goes viral, a news station with a big news event, both the streaming and the over-the-air audience are going to go up. Same thing with a big sporting event and a sports station. So we believe that while that relationship needs to be studied and incorporated into a model the right way, there is the ability to rely on panels to focus on the big picture and a broad period of time, and then use data science to make that data more actionable at a more specific and detailed level. And then lastly, you can use the streaming data and can connect other data to it to understand the shopping behaviors and interests of the audience, and use a model to project that onto the over-the-air audience with the proper adjustments made to it. So I just want to close by presenting a few insights related to the streaming audience in the Czech Republic. I want to thank both Active Radio and MMS for helping with these insights, and congratulations to the Czech Republic on their 100th radio anniversary. So the first is the real-time reporting of the streaming audience. This is just one chart that is available in our user interface. It can tell you from a few minutes ago. Right now it's in 5-minute increments, although there is the potential to get down to 1 minute. It can tell you from a few minutes ago what level your streaming audience is at. And radio over-the-air ratings are not available. Obviously, in real time, there's a delay. That delay varies by market. So this is really your first insight into how your audience is responding to your content. Are they continuing to listen, or are they tuning out? And there are a bunch of metrics that can be produced along with this. And we believe this should really sit on a dashboard at every radio station, so they know in real time. They have their first indicator into how the audience is reacting, and it's something that can be done today. As far as listening by device in the Czech Republic compared to what we see globally, a lot more listening on computer, not a lot of smart speaker adoption, and certainly mobile, which I would expect will continue to grow. From a geographical perspective, 8% of all listening to these Czech radio stations are occurring outside of the country, in particular Germany and Slovakia, but others as well. And you can also see that listening by region within the country. And then lastly, you can look at different stations, and you can look at it across a day, across an average day, and you can see different stations have a different peak. Some are a shorter peak, some are a longer peak, some peak like the comedy station on the upper right, some peak late in the day. And so you can understand your streaming listening by time. And then we also plotted all weekdays across a year. And we'll see that the 8 major bank holidays have a significant drop in listening. But there is one Czech holiday, I can't pronounce it, Dusiki, I know I'm doing that wrong. So that actually is a holiday where there's actually more streaming listening than any other day in the year. So an interesting finding. And then my last hybrid movie quote, Jerry Maguire, I don't know if you guys have seen it. We'll see if the audio works, or I'll have to act it out loud. But this is what the sample data said to the panel data, or vice versa.
I love you. Oh. You complete me.
So, very dramatic. I was prepared to act that out. I mean, I'm no Tom Cruise, but so that's it. We would love to continue this conversation with you, and thank you for your attention.
You?
We might have time for one question for both. The time's up, I know, but I mean, it's not rarely you get these people in the room, so if you have a question, it's now. Okay, I'll just talk to them afterwards. Is there one? In the back. Oh, it's in the back. Okay. Oh, UK, here you come. Yeah, go.
Hello. Hi, I'm Anne Charles from the UK. I had 2 questions, I'm really sorry. First one was, how do you ensure data privacy? Because in the Europe we have GDPR. And secondly, for Grant, how do you ensure that your program teams can still maintain their creativity and aren't worried that they're going to be presented with a minute-by-minute list of all the times their link wasn't good and the audience dropped off?
I can talk privacy. We also have similar privacy rules and regulations we have to follow very strictly. We also have additional privacy rules and regulations with our public broadcaster. So everything that we do is de-identified. There's no personal information shared or anything like that. So we do cover that, yeah.
I think you should go on stage. I filmed it so that they could see you.
And in relation to the second question on minute-by-minute data, I think it's vital that our creative teams actually have access to it. Most importantly, probably producers and related, just to see what is resonating with the audience and what's not. Sometimes we can talk for long periods of time, ideally driving an audience, but fundamentally not. So having access to that is real-time data that allows us to change the conversation. If you look at shopping channels over many years in broadcast areas of free-to-air TV, they can talk about what's red, white, blue, gold or silver and change that on a dime. And if it's trending up and they're selling more in an e-commerce capacity, they say more things about that product, or alternatively, if they're not, they obviously stop and move on to a different product or subject matter. I think that's going to be entirely valuable for our teams to understand what is the feedback from audiences.
Hi, any plan for audience measurement for listening in the car?
Can you hear me? Yeah. We do already capture audio listening in the car. So do you mean radio listening or total audio?
Distinguishing that from listening in other circumstances.
Yeah, not at this stage within the radio ratings currency, but it is something that we'll probably look at as a more internal industry focus with our share of audio study.
And likewise through our product that I'll talk about tomorrow through Listener. We're enabled across every platform and every device. So to that end, we are gaining real-time data, which we think therefore becomes a monetisable data play for us in car. So it doesn't matter whether it's in car, smart speakers, desktop, or traditional devices. Fundamentally, we want to understand the co-relationship between each of those and fundamentally turn it into a monetisable audience.